Howdy, and welcome to episode 31 of T-Shirts and Shawls. I'm Karen, and today is Thursday, June 15th, 2017. So last time that I recorded 2 weeks ago, that Thursday, the very next day, we jumped in the car super early in the morning, like 4 a.m., and drove from Texas to Florida. We went on vacation. So I actually, even though I brought knitting with me, I did not do a lot of knitting on vacation. I do actually have some really great things to talk about in this episode, but the what I'm knitting section itself is going to be a little sparse, but the what I'm designing section, I've got some great book news. So definitely have stuff to talk about there. And so we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. So our vacation, I said we went to Florida. Where we went was Disney World. This was my very first time to Disney. I have not been to Land or World, so definitely a brand new experience for me. My in-laws basically took us on this trip. So myself, Jarrett, and Luke, and then Jarrett's brother and his family. So we all went. Jarrett's brother has three girls. One is still a baby. So she's about 7 or 8 months old. The middle girl is Luke's age. Luke is 3 weeks older. So they are very close in age. And then the oldest girl is 9. So with all of us, we had 10 people that were going on this trip, and there were definitely some times where it was difficult to do something all together, especially like dinner reservations was hard to get for a big group, but we made do. We got together whenever we could. Sometimes we did kind of our own things, and it was a really fun trip overall. So one of the things that I wanted to do on the trip was to find a souvenir shirt. So that was one of the big souvenirs that I wanted, and there was definitely no shortage of shops to buy souvenirs, and no shortage of shirts. So I don't even know how many shirts I looked at, but definitely a lot of shirts. And I had 3 kind of themes or ideas for what I wanted the shirt to be. The first one was my favorite Mickey is the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So anything that had to do with Mickey as the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And I found several shirts that were really neat. The one that I liked the most as far as the design, the paint or whatever was used to do the design had a lot of glitter in it. So I liked the image, I liked the color, it was a really pretty blue. But I really didn't like the glitter. It didn't come off on my hand, but I was worried about, washing it or, wearing it more. Maybe the glitter would come off. And then also the design was over all of the front of the shirt. And when I felt the fabric, it felt really stiff with the design. So I decided not to get that one, even though it looked really nice. And then I really didn't find any other Sorcerer's Apprentice shirts that I fell in love with. So my second theme was Star Wars, obviously. And there were a lot of really great Star Wars shirts. Luke actually ended up with 2 Star Wars shirts, but I never really found the one that said, this is the shirt that you really need. So my third theme was Beauty and the Beast. And that is ultimately what I found. So I actually found this shirt on the very last day of our vacation. So I'll stand up so you can see it. So basically it is an outline of Belle. And I don't necessarily love the gold because to me it's a little too flashy. That's not usually me, but I really, really love the outline of Belle and her name there. So I decided to go ahead and get the shirt. Plus, it was the last day, and I thought I can't go without getting a shirt. So I picked this one. So, Beauty and the Beast, the animated version came out when I was in high school, and I immediately fell in love with it. There are issues with the story itself, but Beauty and the Beast is my favorite fairy tale. I also, in high school, read Robin McKinley's versions. I say versions because she wrote 2 different versions of Beauty and the Beast, one called Beauty and the other one is Rose Daughter, which was a much darker retelling. But the thing that I think I love most about Belle is that she's a reader. She is someone who feels very passionately about books. And in Robin McKinley's version, the library that the Beast takes her to, this is in Robin McKinley's Beauty, the library that the Beast takes her to is full of books that have yet to be written. I just think that's really cool. I mean, do you imagine going to a library and seeing books that, you know, sometime in the future might become really popular or a bestseller, a really wonderful book, but nobody has experienced it yet because it has yet to be written. So I just love that little detail. So anyway, so Beauty and the Beast has been my favorite ever since pretty much high school. Okay, so even though that is true, and my husband and I are about to celebrate next month our 17th wedding anniversary, apparently he did not realize that Beauty and the Beast was my favorite. So I had told him that I really wanted to eat dinner at the Be Our Guest restaurant, because I specifically wanted dinner because supposedly that's when the Beast makes an appearance, so you can do a meet and greet with him. And so I really wanted to do that, and that is one of the restaurants that is the hardest to get reservations. And I guess I did not strongly enough explain how much I wanted to go to that restaurant, and we did not get reservations. Some of that had to do with the big group, and no one else really wanted to go there, and so we just kind of, the communication wasn't there, I'll just say. So we missed getting reservations. And I tried to get reservations while we were there, and we thought about trying to do a standby. It seemed like standby for lunch was a little easier, but it just never worked out, and we never got to eat there, which after I looked at the menu, I realized might have been a good thing, because I really didn't see anything on the menu that I jumped at the chance, especially the dinner menu, that I jumped at the chance to eat. And there was nothing on the kids' menu that I knew Luke would eat. He's a very picky eater, which we ran into several problems on the trip because of that. But I realized that it probably would not have been the greatest eating experience. But I would have liked to at least have seen inside of it, because the pictures that I've seen of it look really, really neat. But unfortunately we didn't do that, but that's okay. I did get the shirt, and we went to Gaston's Tavern, where we got to have this giant cinnamon roll, and you know, so that was fun. Anyway, so yes, so now my husband knows that Beauty and the Beast is my favorite fairy tale, my favorite Disney animated movie, and see what happens in the future with that. Speaking of the live action version, I still have not seen. Again, apparently, since my husband didn't realize how much I loved it, and I didn't push very hard to go see it when it was in the theater, we didn't see it. But he did have to go to Target yesterday for another reason, and he picked up a copy of the movie since it just came out. He picked up a copy of the movie, so this weekend we will sit down and finally get to watch the new live-action version. So anyway, so that ultimately is the shirt that I picked, the Belle shirt, and now even after almost 17 years of marriage, my husband learned something new about me. I guess I also learned that maybe I need to communicate things like that a little bit more. The shawl that I picked today is the Astalot shawl, which is the first shawl that I designed. And I decided to pick it because, like I mentioned in the intro, I have a big announcement in the designing section. Basically, I have a print copy of my book, and now a release date for it, so I'll be talking all about that in a minute. So I thought it might be nice to talk about the first shawl that I designed. So this is Astalot. It is a triangular shawl. So I'm going to show you half of it since it's hard to show the whole thing. So there's the main stitch pattern and then the border. And I had wanted to design a shawl for a while. I had done hats and cowls already, and I was ready to design a shawl. And I had lots of resources that I had found online about designing shawls. But then I saw that one of the yarn shops in the area, which has since closed, Mad Tosh Crafts, they were offering a class on designing a triangular shawl. So I decided, even though I had all the resources and I could have done it on my own, I decided to go ahead and take that class, mostly as a way to give me a push toward actually sitting down and designing the shawl. So I took the class. And because it was at Mad Tosh Crafts, I decided to use Mad Tosh yarn for the shawl. And so when I got to there for the class, I went to the wall where Mad Tosh sock, that was the base I decided to use. And I knew in advance that I wanted this to be the Astalot shawl. That was the name. Astalot, the Lady of Astalot, is also maybe more recognizably known as the Lady of Shalott. There is the really famous pre-Raphaelite picture by Waterhouse of the Lady of Shalott. She's in a boat. Basically, she has an unrequited love for Lancelot, and she eventually gets in a boat. She dies and has her women put her in a boat, and the boat floats down to Camelot, and Lancelot sees this woman who has basically died for love of him. In the Waterhouse picture, she is in the boat, but she's still alive, and she's sitting up, and she has this very, just very forlorn look of despair on her face. And the image is probably my favorite painting, and just so tragic, but really, really well done painting. So the kind of predominant color in that painting is a lot of browns. So I knew that I wanted to get a brown. So I'm standing in front of the wall of yarn and looking through the browns, and I finally picked this one. I forgot to look up the name. I believe it is Bark. So that's what I picked. And then I went over and started the class, and we talked about the shape of the shawl and putting a stitch pattern into it and whatnot. And I can't remember if it was 1 week or 2 weeks between. It was a 2-class session, but it was 1 or 2 weeks between the class session. And I went home and I basically got this giant pad of graph paper out, and I drew the outline of the shawl. So because of the increases, it basically stair steps. And then I looked through lots of stitch dictionaries, got ideas for stitch patterns, kind of took one and adjusted it a little bit, and started basically plotting it out on the graph paper. And I will say that this shawl taught me a lot of lessons about designing shawls. So the first thing that I learned is that because of the way the increases work, if you're doing this just symmetrical triangular shawl, then you're doing an increase on the side, and you're also doing an increase in the middle. So the side itself stair steps, and then the other side does the stair step up. And when you're putting a repeating stitch pattern into it, the number of stitches within the repeat makes a huge difference with how it works with that stair step and whether or not you're going to ever have rows that repeat. And this one, I did not have numbers that worked out, and none of the rows ever repeated themselves. They were always just slightly off. So this pattern charts out and writes out every single row. Which is fine, but it makes for a really long pattern, and when you're knitting it, yes, you can get the stitch pattern, memorized in your head, but as far as like where to start that stitch pattern each row, you have to refer to the pattern. So I learned to maybe play with the math a little bit more and try to get those to match up, so that way you could have row repeats. So that was one lesson that I learned. And then when it came time for the border, I decided what I wanted to do was take this idea of these kind of slanted lines here and just broaden them out to create the border. So it just kind of flowed out to the edge. So I have told a few people this, but a little design secret. So you see the hearts on the border. Most people, when they see this shawl, that is the thing that catches their eye, and they say, I love the hearts on the border. I didn't plan those. That was an accident. A very happy accident. But really what I was doing was just taking this idea of the lines that came out and just widening them and to create the border, and it happened to work out really nicely to create hearts. So, I'll take it. So that was a really happy accident there. And then it came time for the actual border, and I realized that if I just did a bind off, then especially with this section here, since it had a wide section of stockinette, there would be a lot of curling on the border. So I had to think about what I was going to do to maybe try to not have as much curling there. And so that was the point where I was at when I went to the second class. I was ready to figure out how to end the shawl. What do I need to do to make sure that it's not curling on the border? But I also ran into another problem. So Mad Tosh sock is a fingering weight yarn, but it has 395 yards. And most fingering weight yarns have more than that. I do have a base that has only 400 yards, the Gawing base, but like Camelot has 435 yards. So that's an extra 40 yards compared to the Mad Tosh sock, and that makes a huge difference when you're creating a shawl, because before the border, or maybe right in the middle of the border, I ran out of yarn, the first skein of yarn. So I really, really hated to have to break into a second skein of yarn just for, I think it ended up being like 3.5 rows plus a bind off. And so I was really unhappy with having to do that, because I know that people who knit the pattern, especially if they use the yarn, the same yarn that I did, they're going to also run into that problem. And then you have a second skein that you've only used a little bit of, and then you have a bunch left over. So if you use a different yarn, and like Camelot that has those extra 40 yards, you can get this shawl out of one skein. So I also made sure to include, you need 400 and however many yards if you're using a different yarn. So this also taught me to really think about yarn usage and how to really make sure that you're not getting so close to the end of a skein that either I, the designer, have to break into a second skein, or it's so close that if somebody's gauge is a little looser and they're using more yarn, they're going to have to get into a second skein. So it really, really taught me more about yarn usage as well in designing. So I'm much more aware of that now. And I did finish the pattern. The class really helped, pushed me to get through it and publish the pattern, and it's one that has done pretty well. So I'm happy with it. I really like the way it looks, and that is the first shawl that I designed. So speaking of designing, I have something exciting to show you. This is the proof copy of my new book. So basically it is the copy for me to check to make sure that it printed out okay before I go order, multiple copies and then find out that there is some type of error. Maybe a page was offset wrong or something, or some of the colors didn't turn out. I wanted to make sure that everything looked good before I placed an order. So this is my print copy. It came on Tuesday. So I've only had this in my hands for 48 hours. So there is the cover, which I did show the cover image on in my newsletter, and then also I posted a little bit on Instagram. So I did want to show you a couple of the pages in the book. So it starts off with an introduction that talks about the inspiration. So the book is called The Parliament of Cowls, and it's based on Chaucer's Middle English poem, The Parliament of Fowls, which is basically a debate among birds. It's a love debate. So I talk in the introduction all about the inspiration behind the names of all the patterns. So the patterns are all based on the birds that are part of this love debate. And the basically there is a female eagle. The Middle English word is formel. Formel just means female, but she's called the formel. And there are 3 male eagles. They are called tercel eagles. Tercel basically means male. There are 3 male eagles who want to be her mate. And so Dame Nature is there presiding over all of the birds who are choosing their mates. And there basically is a debate that breaks out over which of these 3 male eagles the female eagle should choose. And basically a lot of the birds give their opinions. And so what I've done is I have 8 different cowl patterns based upon the female eagle, the 3 male eagles, and then 4 of the birds in the debate. So I will show you basically, so you guys are getting kind of the first look of the pictures. The photography was done by Brad Barton, who is the husband of Elisa Barton, the owner of the Knitting Fairy. So if you see these lovely pictures, that is his work. And then the layout, the design of it is very similar to my first book, this one, Gawain Shield. So if you have that book, then the format of the inside will look very familiar. So this is the formel. So that's the cover cowl, different image. Then we have the royal tercel. So this is a little bit easier to see the heart pattern there. Just showed you a little bit of the instructions. Oops. Anyway, the second tercel, so the second male eagle. And then we have, and so there are little hearts on that one as well. Like I said, this is a love debate. Then the third tercel. And then we go into the birds that are giving their opinions in this debate. So this is the falcon. And this cowl actually uses short rows in the back, so the back is narrower than the front. So that was fun to design. The goose. So this is one that has kind of a ruffled edge, so that it the body itself is very plain, but the edge is ruffled and is the kind of the focus of that one. And you can see kind of the edge laid out a bit right there. And then we have the turtle dove, and this one is hard to see in the photograph because it is a tall cowl, so when you're wearing it, it is bunched up around the neck. So the turtle dove, and then yeah, I can show you this page, there's not too much on it. And then up here, I don't know how well you can see that, uses knits and pearls to create a heart, or kind of a round of hearts. And then there's some more textured stitches and stripes on the rest of it. And then finally, the last one is the cuckoo. And this is one that I did in this really bright yellow, which was really challenging to take a photo of. That was something that we worked on quite a bit in the photo session. But there's the cuckoo. That one is very heavily cabled. So lots and lots of cables with that one. And so here it is. There are 2 pictures where the colors seem a bit off. So I've asked the graphic designer to go back and see if there's something that we can do to kind of tweak those 2 images just to make the color a little more closer to the actual color. So she's working on that right now. But it shouldn't take too long to do that. So I am going to be doing a release party at the Knitting Fairy. So if you are in the Dallas area, then I definitely would love to see you come to the release party. And I will provide all the details for all of this information in my newsletter. So the best way to find out about the release of the book and the release party and all of that is to make sure that you're on my mailing list. So if you're not already on the mailing list, I will put a link in the show notes and you can go there and make sure you're signed up so you can get all this information. But basically, we decided that July 22nd was a good date both for the shop as well as kind of far enough in advance to make sure that we have time, like I said here, to tweak a couple of the colors and to get the printed copies to arrive. So I will, like I said, give all specific details about that on the mailing list. But go ahead and mark your calendars if you're in the area for July 22nd. That is a Saturday at the Knitting Fairy. And I believe it'll be kind of like 11 to 1, kind of that time period. And I will have a door prize, I guess. So a really, really nice door prize. It'll have quite a bit of yarn in the door prize. So anyone who comes to the release party and buys or has pre-ordered and picks up the book at the release party will be entered into that drawing. And if you don't live in the local area, I will have some prizes for people to potentially win who order the book. So again, all that information will be in the newsletter, so make sure you're subscribed to get to that. But basically, next week is Houston Fiber Festival, so I will have the proof copy available for people to look at, and then I will start taking pre-orders. So that way, basically the pre-order allows me to know how many copies of the book to buy in advance. I don't want to buy not enough and then run out and then have to wait, because it takes a couple of weeks for the printer to get the copies to me. So I don't want to have to wait, but I also don't want to buy too many and then end up with a huge stack of books that don't sell. So the pre-orders help me be able to judge that a little bit better. But it also allows me to do some prize giveaway things, so that'll be fun. So I will, if you're at Houston Fiber Festival, then you can pre-order the book at Houston Fiber Festival, or I will have an online way of pre-ordering the book if you are not going to be at Houston Fiber Festival. So again, all that information will be going out to the mailing list, so make sure you are subscribed if you want to find that out. But this idea, Parliament of Cowls, has been in my head for at least a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years, when I came up with the idea, Parliament of Fowls, Parliament of Cowls, and that light bulb moment. So this has been in the works for quite a while, so it's really thrilling to actually hold this copy in my hand and to know, let me show you the back, and to know that it will be coming out very soon. So really exciting news. As far as other designing things, I am finally getting to the point where I am not as mad about that shawl that turned out completely wrong, the shawl that originally was also going to go in the book. So I will probably, after I get back from Houston Fiber Fest, sit down, redesign that to get the stitch pattern to not be upside down, and then start working on that. And then I have a few other things that I may want to work on. I may jump straight into working on the third book because I already know what that idea is going to be, or I may do some individual patterns. We'll see. But right now, focus is the book, getting news out about it, and getting it printed and shipped out to people who want to buy it and to knit some of the patterns from it. For what I am dyeing, I am basically really making sure I have everything I need for Houston Fiber Festival. So there's still actually quite a bit I would like to dye for Houston, especially with the self-striping. So I have, I'm leaving in 1 week because setup is next Thursday. So I have a lot more to do. I'm going to shift the camera just a little bit. You can see that stack of yarn over there on top of the boxes. That is yarn that I have reskeined that I need to label. Most of that is self-striping. A little bit, here we go. The yarn up here on top of that box is Isolde, the lace weight yarn. So got quite a bit of more to work on, but I'm getting there. As far as knitting samples, this is Great Cheer, and I want to have it done in time for Houston, which I have a week, I can do it. I'm down to the last few gusset decreases, and then just knit on for the foot. So I'm working on that. And once I finish this, there will be one old color, Eric and Enid, which is another 2-striper, that I do not have a sample for. So I'm almost caught up on sample socks for all of my current self-striping colors. I talked to Elisa at the Knitting Fairy to find out the theme for the yarn crawl, because I will be doing a trunk show at the Knitting Fairy for the yarn crawl. Can't reveal the theme, it is a secret for now, but it definitely gave me some ideas for a self-striping yarn that will be exclusive for the yarn crawl. So I will be working on that basically when I get back from Houston. And then I think that I want to start doing more self-striping colors. I actually have another colorway that's kind of in the back of my head that I'm thinking about doing. And I think I want to kind of, especially once I get past the show season, and I have more time where I'm not just trying to catch up and have enough inventory for a show. I wanted to do some new colors, and so I think that's something that I'm going to plan out and work on in the future. As far as yarn clubs, today is actually the shipment day for month 5 of the 9-month Tristan and Isolde Yarn Club. So we are now going to be over the halfway point, which means I probably should start thinking about the yarn club after Tristan and Isolde. I already know the theme of that club, not quite ready to reveal it, but I already know the theme. So I think I just, again, when I get back from Houston, I'll sit down, reread that story, so I can get it fresh in my head and start thinking about the colors. Tentatively, what I'm thinking about for that yarn club, the current yarn club, Tristan and Isolde, kind of the, as far as the yarn itself, a lot of the bases are kind of experimental bases, so bases that I have not used before. One of the bases was 100% BFL, a DK weight yarn. The one in the 4th shipment was a blend of alpaca and silk, which I hadn't done before. And then this month's shipment, not going to tell you what it is, but this month's shipment is again a new yarn, and it's one that I'm not fully sure about. So I definitely want to see what the yarn club members think about it. And then what was the other one? The alpaca silk. 2 more. Yes, there are 2 more yarns that are kind of new trial bases. Both of those I'm super excited about. And then, so the 4 shipments left, 2 more of the trial bases and 2 are bases that I already have. So this club was kind of trying out new bases. And I think for the next club, I want the focus to be less on the bases and more on maybe trying out some different color types of things. Not variegated, because I really don't want that, but maybe a little more variety on the tonal. So maybe experiment more with the colors. And with that in mind, I think what I want to do is have options for the bases. So if you really love Camelot, say that's the yarn that you want to knit with, then you can get it. This will be either a 4 or 5 month club. Then you can choose to get Camelot for your entire subscription. If you love worsted weight yarn and Lancelot is your favorite, then if you want to get the club yarns on Lancelot, then that is your option. So I need to make sure that I can logistically, when you sign up for the club, that you can pick the base that you want. And obviously the price of the club would be based upon what base you choose. But I think I want to let you guys pick your base, and then that will kind of allow me to experiment with the colors and not also be trying out lots of new bases, because some of the bases that I've been working on for this club take color very differently from some of the bases I've used in the past. So that has definitely been a fun experiment, but it gives, there are a lot of factors that go into play with it. So I think if I want to experiment more with color, then I need to use bases that I'm more familiar with, I guess. I'll say it that way. And also, sometimes I think it's nice to know that you're getting a base that you enjoy working with. So that's not completely set in stone, but that's kind of the ideas that I have in my head as far as the next yarn club. So if that is something that you're interested in, then I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. If that's something you're completely not interested in, I'd also, if you prefer having, the trial experimental bases, let me know that too. Not saying that, just because I do something for one club doesn't mean that that's how it has to be forever. That's one thing I like about these yarn clubs, that I'm able to try out some different things. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of what's going on in Roundtable Yarns. So I knew that we were going to be pretty busy on our vacation, and I probably would not have much time to knit. So I thought about which project or projects I wanted to bring with me, and I decided socks were the way to go, because it's easy to carry, easy to work with, especially if you do self-striping sock yarn and just do a plain vanilla sock. So I also decided that I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out of knitting, and so I didn't bring either of the socks that I currently had on my needles. The sample socks for Great Cheer and the second sock for the Houston Fiber Fest exclusive colorway. I didn't bring those. I decided I wanted to start a brand new sock project. So I actually wound 2 different skeins of self-striping sock yarn, because in my head I imagined that I would have way more time to knit than I really did, and I thought that I would finish a whole pair of socks and then need to start a second pair of socks. That didn't happen. Instead, I did no knitting in the car ride all the way to Florida. Perfect knitting time. Why didn't I do any knitting? Well, when you wake up at 3 a.m. and get in the car before 4 a.m., my head was just off all that day. And I did do some of the driving as well, so obviously did not knit during that time. But I really was just off and just tired, just lethargic, and just sitting there and knitting was just too much. And also, sorry, that's my chair if you heard that squeaky noise. I also realized that part of the problem was because I had not yet started the sock, and so I would have to do the whole, casting on and counting, not that it's really hard, but casting on and counting and dividing amongst the needles and getting it started and doing the ribbing. And I think it wasn't knitting that was so exhausting, but it was the getting started that was exhausting. So that's something that I kind of learned, maybe, especially if you're going to be traveling super early in the morning to start out with, maybe go ahead and bring a project that's already been started, or at least get the project started before you go. And I think that starting the project is the thing that kind of kept me from just sitting down and doing some knitting in odd moments here and there. So I did not do any knitting the entire time that we were at Disney. I did not knit again until we got in the car to travel back to Texas. So I had a whole week of no knitting, which we were busy, and so I didn't miss it in the sense that there was as much downtime, but it was definitely the longest period I've gone without knitting for quite a while. A lot of that had to do with, we were in a hotel room with the 5-year-old and trying to get him to bed at a decent hour, which, we were never anywhere near his bedtime, but trying to get him to bed at a decent hour. We needed to, make sure the room was dark so that way he would go to sleep, and it's kind of hard to knit in a dark room, especially when you have not started your sock and you still need to cast on. Again, start your project before you go. So just never really had time to sit down and do the knitting. And then when maybe I would have had time, it was hot. To be honest, I was uncomfortable and sweaty. I didn't really feel, my hands were, even when I washed them, they still just didn't feel super clean, and I didn't want to touch yarn. Or the days we were not sweaty, we got rained upon, and so I was, just not feeling completely physically comfortable, which made me not really want to touch yarn. But jumped in the car on Saturday at a more reasonable time, and I started the sock right away. And I used mustache yarn. I have several skeins of mustache in my stash, but I had not actually used any of it yet. So this was my first mustache yarn. And the colorway is Dark Side EPV, Extended Play version. And this is what it looks like. So you've got big sections of gray, and then going into black, and then you do a rainbow. So I'll show you the rainbow, red to purple, and then back to black, and then the big section of gray. So from Florida to Texas is a pretty long drive. I did do a little bit of driving myself, although my husband drove the most of the way, and I almost got the entire sock done on that trip. I basically got down to just when I was doing the toe decreases, so mostly the gray, but a little bit of the black down here. So I almost did a complete sock on that trip. And if I hadn't done it, if I had not driven at all, if my husband had driven the whole way and I had that extra couple of hours, I definitely would have finished. But I think it's nice to give him a bit of a break and to do some driving. So anyway, so I almost completed the sock on the drive back. And then I finished it. I actually finished the very last stitches last night. So with this sock, I tried another tactic for the heel. So I usually like to do a heel flap and gusset because that fits my foot best, but it doesn't work with self-striping. So I've talked about this before. And so I've tried a new thing now where I break the yarn when I'm about to start the heel flap, and I used the other end of the yarn, so that way when I started working in the round again, I could just go back to where I was in the stripe pattern and not lose, especially looking at the top of the foot, that I'm not going to lose the stripe pattern. And that's been working pretty well. This one of the things there is that when you start working in the round, again, you have, and I actually have this on, I actually have this on the Great Cheer sock because I did do just a regular heel flap. So because you have a lot of stitches and then you start decreasing them for the gusset, it does cause your stripes to be a little narrower. So if you look, so here's the width of the stripes, and then when I go here, you can see how this blue stripe right here is just a little narrower when compared to the blue stripes. You can see it here better, not so much so that it, I think that it's a problem, but it is a little bit there. So I thought, okay, what can I do to potentially make it so the stripes are more even? And especially because I wasn't sure when I started the sock where I would be when I got to the heel. I was worried that I might be in the rainbow section, and since these are pretty narrow stripes to begin with, I thought that if that section is there at the decrease of the gussets, then I might actually start losing some of those stripes, since it does, it only has 2 to 3 rounds per color. So I decided to use a heel that is kind of a heel flap and gusset, but it's a modified heel flap and gusset. It comes from a pattern called the OMG heel, And the idea there is that when you're doing the short rows, so when you're actually turning the heel part and doing the short rows, so if you've never done a sock, this might not make sense to you, but if you've done the heel flap and gusset, so you do a heel flap and then you do some short rows to actually make the turn. When you're doing the short rows on a regular heel flap and gusset, you do some decreases. And so you end up with fewer stitches there. And then when you pick up for the gusset stitches, then you have a lot more stitches and then you decrease some more. With this one, the way that you do the short rows, you don't do any decreases. So you keep the same number of stitches that you started with. And then you don't have quite as many stitches to pick up in the gusset. I think I normally have 16 that I pick up, and this one has you pick up 8, so half. And so there aren't quite as many stitches in the gusset. And then the first round, after you start knitting in the round again, you decrease those extra stitches in that round. So normally you decrease 1 on each side, and then you knit around without decreases, and then you decrease again 1 on each side and you knit around, and usually it's a much longer I put that down again. It's a much longer section of decreases. Here you just decrease right away. So you're not going to have those rounds that have narrower stripes. So that worked well and good as far as that was concerned. However, I did run into a small issue. Basically, whenever I came time to start being ready to work in the round again, I was off over on this side of the heel, and my yarn that I needed to use to knit in the round was off on this side. So that caused a little bit of a problem with the working yarn not being in the right place. So I had to kind of do some modifications to be able to get the working yarn to be in the place that I wanted it to be. It also created kind of this narrow gray stripe here. So it's kind of got this like black patch on the heel, but you know what? That's the bottom of the foot. That's the heel. It does not bother me. I think it actually kind of looks neat to have that little black patch there on the heel, so that's fine. But it definitely caused a problem with the working yarn not being in the place I needed it to be when I was ready to work back in the round. So I wrote myself a few little notes to hopefully remember what I did for the second sock so I can make them match, because with mustache yarns she often does a must match. So what she does is she has 2 half skeins that are actually wound together. So you get 2 cakes. So this is the one that I used, and this is the one that I need to use. And so that way they will be in the same exact place and will have the same exact stripe length. So that way you can match your socks. I usually purposefully don't match up the stripe patterns, so that way if there is any discrepancy, it's not obvious. But I think with the way that Mustache does her 2 half skeins, I think it'll be a lot easier for the stripe pattern to make sure to match up. I just have to make sure to match it up. So I also did not yet weave in the end here from where I cast on, so that way when I do my next cast on for the second sock, I can see how much of an end I had left, so I know exactly where I started in the gray, and get these to match up as much as possible. So fingers crossed that I remember exactly what I did on the first sock and do it for the second sock. And then since I got back, I have knit a few more repeats on rice fields, so just kind of not even take the full thing out. So a little bit more on my rice fields, but I think about 3 more pattern repeats. Still a bit to go on that one. That is my one that I'm doing for the quarterly knit along, so I do need to finish it by the end of the month, since that is the end of the quarter. So basically once I finish with the sample sock for Great Cheer, my focus will be on rice fields, and I will get that done hopefully by the end of the month. Then I still have some projects I need to cast on, because both of them are gift projects, and so I really need to do that. But again, I think I'll give myself permission to wait until after Houston Fiber Fest, because that definitely is a focus right now. So hopefully next time there will be a little bit more to talk about. It'll be kind of right after Houston Fiber Fest when I record again. So it might be the episode after that that I really get some new projects on the needles to talk about. So I finally did it. I gave up on that second book in the Discovery of Witches trilogy. I brought my Kindle with me to on our vacation, and sadly I did not do any reading. I didn't do any knitting. I didn't do any reading. And part of it may have been because I really wasn't excited about that book. So I finally decided I'm giving up on it. It's taken way more of my time than I have gotten out of it, and I need to move on. So in the episode 30, so the last episode discussion, one of you, Ash Salt, recommended a book that she thought I might like, and it is by Becky Chambers, and I'm trying to see my computer screen for the name of the book, so excuse me for just a second. It is called Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. So Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And a little bit Firefly-like in that there is a ship, a spaceship that is basically out kind of on the reaches of the universe, the inhabited universe, and there's a crew on the ship. And so in that way, it's kind of similar to Firefly. Not all of the crew members are humans. So there's definitely some different species of various interplanetary beings. And so I decided, you know what? I'll give this book a try. Might as well. And so I've only gotten a little bit into it. I think I'm in the third chapter. So I'm very early on into the book. But it definitely, I think, is something that I'm a lot more interested in. So hopefully I will get through that. It looks like the author has a second book. I'm not sure if there are more to come after that. Again, I don't like to accidentally read spoilers, and so I don't usually look things like that up until I am closer to the end of whichever book is the most recent one. So I will eventually look that up. But so far I'm enjoying it. There are a couple of things that have made my editor heart a little sad. And this happens in lots of books. Mostly it has to do with pronoun usage, where the he that is most recently referred to he means the male person or being that is most recently referred to, and that's how it should be. But a lot of times people use pronouns that don't refer straight back to the most recently named person, and it starts to get a little bit confusing. That's one of the things when I am doing editing that I really work hard to correct, to make sure that pronoun references are definitely not confusing. In this book, there are a few that should have been cleaned up, and there are a couple of other little things, but not enough. I'm trying to turn off the editor brain and just enjoy the story, because so far the characters seem to be really interesting, and I look forward to seeing how they interact with one another in the story. So thank you, Ashley, for your recommendation. I think that it seems like it's a book that I'm going to enjoy. Other things, not really much that I am reading, but watching. We actually went to go see Wonder Woman. Gosh, I think we just saw it yesterday. No, the day before yesterday. We saw it on Monday. My husband took the day off of work on Monday since we just got back on Sunday. And so we went and watched Wonder Woman and took Luke to go see it. There were probably some things in it that maybe were a little too much for him, but overall I did really like the movie. I think that it was a really great addition to the superhero genre. It was an interesting story, and we saw it. So it's been, I don't go see very many movies in the theater. I did see Fantastic Beasts. That was the most recent movie I had seen before that, before this one. But we went to kind of the fancier theater where we actually had chairs that reclined. So they were like big, wide chairs, and they reclined, and you could lie back, and it actually had a footrest. You can put your foot up. I had no idea. I guess my husband goes to see movies a lot more than me, and I guess that he usually tries to get into those theaters with the more comfortable seating. I had no idea that actually existed. This was just the theater at the mall. They have a couple of screens that are like that, apparently. So it's kind of a neat movie-going experience, a lot more comfortable. And because of the way the rows are staggered, you don't have to worry so much about someone sitting in front of you and blocking out part of the screen. So it was a pretty nice experience. So as far as anything else, really, this should be, I guess, called reading, watching, and listening to. So listening to, I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks when I am rescanning yarn or prepping yarn for self-striping. And a lot of the podcasts that I've been listening to lately have been political. I listen to the Ezra Klein show, The Weeds, which is another show that Ezra Klein is part of. I listen to something called No Jargon that talks about different issues. Not all of them are political, but many of them are, and it kind of breaks them down into to No Jargon. So I get a lot of that input, and sometimes it just gets really tiring because there's so much going on, and so much that I want to keep up with it, but also just kind of feeling bombarded sometimes. So I've been trying to find some podcasts that are still interesting, that I can listen to, that maybe aren't quite as political. And yes, I do listen to some knitting podcasts, but most of those, like this one, are video ones. And when I'm rescanning yarn, I'm doing a lot of getting up and doing this and moving around and not necessarily looking at the screen. So watching a video podcast is a lot more difficult during that time. So mostly I'm listening to just audio podcasts. Anyway, long story short. So a friend of mine did on her blog a list of 5 podcasts that she listens to, and one of them is a podcast called Lore. So Lore, like folk lore. And it sounded kind of interesting, and so I went and I started listening to it from the very first episode. I think there are about 80 episodes now. They're roughly about half an hour each. So I started listening, and I am already up to episode 20 something. I have just kind of listened to, I really enjoyed it, and have just started listening to over and over one episode after the other. So the premise there is that he tells stories, basically. Some of them are supernatural stories, some of them are historical things that maybe are stories that aren't quite as well known. And some of them are really creepy. I will admit that after I've listened to quite a few in a row, if it's getting toward the evening and it's getting darker, I actually stop that podcast and listen to something else, because there have been a few of the episodes that have really been creepy. There was one episode in particular on dolls, and it had one story of a doll, and that's one of my fears. Goes back when I was in elementary school. I don't know if any of you guys ever heard this, but the China doll legend story, where supposedly China dolls come to life and their fingernails grow really long and basically they stab you. So 3rd grade, out on the playground, that's the stories that we told each other. And it moved on to other dolls. There were stories about Cabbage Patch Kids and whatnot. So because of that, dolls have been kind of a thing that I definitely am a little afraid of, have a little bit of fear. So that episode in particular, I knew when he started talking about dolls that I should just probably have skipped that episode, but I went ahead and listened to it, and that one was one that was toward the evening and it was starting to get dark, and oh man, I had to actually stop and go out and spend some time with my husband. Luke had already been put in bed, just to kind of get that creep factor down a little bit. Anyway, but if that is the type of story that you like, they're not all supernatural, but many of them are kind of the bizarre stories. Then I'm recommending the podcast. So it's called Lore. I will link to the podcast website in the show notes. I believe it's lorepodcast.com, but I will double check that and make sure to get the right link. And that is what I have been reading, watching, and listening to. So it is almost the end of the quarter. So if you are participating in the knit along, make sure you have about 2 weeks, depending on when you're listening to this. The quarter ends June 30th. So make sure that you post in the FO thread so that you can be eligible for prizes. There's Luke right behind me. He wants to show you his exciting book. So post in the FO thread so that way you can be eligible for prizes. And since we are toward the end of this quarter, it looks like it's about time to start thinking about the theme for the next quarter's knit along. So I will post a thread in the Ravelry group for taking nominations, and then we will do that for about a week.
This is Lego's book.
It's a Lego book. So I'll post about nominations, and then we'll do the vote, and the new quarter will start July 1st.
Legos.
And
look.
Luke is not in school for the summer. We've got 2 months until he starts kindergarten. So you might see him a few more times on the podcast over the next few episodes. Anyway, so quarterly knit along, check the Ravelry group, post if you have not already, and then we will be doing nominations and voting for next quarter's theme. So I thought I'd mention just a few highlights of the trip in case you are interested in that. Like I said, it was my first time at Disney World, so a brand new experience for me. Luke is still in the background. And the very first thing that we did when we got there was to ride Space Mountain. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't realize it was possibly as intense of a ride as it was. And so Luke went on it with us, and that was definitely a way to break into the experience. I think it also made Luke kind of a little fearful of some of the other rides. Some of them he was very hesitant to go on, such as Splash Mountain, because he didn't think that he would like the drop. But Luke, what did you think of Splash Mountain? Yeah, see, thumbs up. He really liked Splash Mountain once he got over the hesitation of seeing it. But the biggest thing that we did is one day we did the Jedi experience. So at Hollywood Studios, they actually have this like 7-hour tour that you go on and do all the things that are Star Wars related at Hollywood Studios.
And I got to do the Force.
Yes, Luke got to do Jedi training. So he got to use the Force and a lightsaber, and he had lots of fun.
Yeah, and I got to fight the sister.
Yes, so half of the Jedis got to fight Darth Vader, and half of the Jedi trainees got to fight the Seventh Sister. I'm actually not as familiar with that one.
Seventh Sister.
Yeah. Okay. So he knows, and he got to fight against her. We got to.
I didn't want to fight Darth Vader.
Yeah.
I'm too scared of Darth Vader.
We actually did get to do a meet and greet with Darth Vader. Apparently he does not do meet and greets anymore, so it was a special thing for us for the tour. We also got to see Kylo Ren, right? Mm-hmm. And who else? Chewbacca, and BB-8.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And then when the stormtroopers, when they did their march through down Main Street, we got to march with them, so right behind them, so that was fun. We also got to do the Star Wars dessert party, so there were lots of yummy desserts there.
Yeah, and then the troopers came.
Yep,
and
the stormtroopers came to check to make sure that we were all doing, nothing that was bad. We got to see the Star Wars light show, so the fireworks and then the show there. we got
And then
to...
we watched Mickey in his dream.
That was a different night. We went to see the other show at Hollywood Studios, which was a Mickey one that he really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I love Village because it has that dump one. What dumps water on us.
Oh, okay.
And the slides are fun.
Yes, the place that we stayed had a really fun area in the pool section for the kids to play in.
And also there's a big pool with a slide that goes in the water.
Yep, a big pool with a slide.
Yeah, and I was too scared. I didn't want to go in.
Yep. So maybe this should just be the Luke show. He should tell you about the experience. Anyway, there were several other things that we got to do on the Star Wars tour that were really, really great. So I enjoyed doing that. What was your favorite moment of our trip? Swimming. He really liked the swimming, which was at our resort. So we could do swimming pretty much anywhere. What about the Toy Story ride?
Yeah, I love it because I love shooting and Buzz Lightyear. Because I go pew, 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 pew.
So there was
pew,
Toy
pew,
Story
pew,
Mania,
pew,
which
pew,
is at
pew,
Hollywood
pew, pew,
Studios,
pew, pew,
and
pew,
then the
pew,
Buzz
pew,
Lightyear,
pew, 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 pew,
whatever
pew.
ride that was, it was at Magic Kingdom. So those are the two that he really enjoyed the most, and we went on those several times. Anything else that you really liked that we should talk about? He really wants to show you this book. Yeah, I think really it was a fun trip overall. There were definitely some times where we got rained upon that was uncomfortable, that it was really hot that was uncomfortable, but we got to do a lot of really great things, eat some really good food, and we managed to not completely overload ourselves with souvenirs, but we each, Luke got a couple of shirts, I got this shirt, and I got a mug of Chip, so from Beauty and the Beast, the little teacup Chip. So there's actually a big coffee mug made out of, that looks like him. And Luke is still showing you his book. Don't know why that seems to be so exciting for him, but he really wanted to do it. Anyway, I think that should do it for the trip. I did post a few pictures on Instagram, so if you are interested, you can go check out my Instagram account. It started with it's actually a series of pictures. It started with the sock that I knit, and then if you scroll through, or if you swipe through, you can see other pictures from our trip. And apparently, Luke's showing you all the books that are these Lego books that he wants to get. So anyway, yeah. So that's a little bit about our trip. Thank you so much for watching this podcast episode. If you are a new viewer, I hope you will come back and check out the podcast again. Make sure to hit subscribe so that way you'll get notifications whenever a new episode releases, basically every other Thursday. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. It really means a lot to me that you want to listen to me talk about knitting and what else is going on in my life. I love talking with you guys about it, so make sure you go over to the Ravelry group for the discussion thread for this episode, and feel free to chat. If you are watching on YouTube, if you click the thumbs up button, if you like the episode, it helps other people find the podcast, so I really appreciate that. Next week I will be at Houston Fiber Fest. It is the 23rd, 24th, 25th. And if you're going to be there, make sure you come by, tell me that you watched the podcast. I'd love to actually meet you guys in person. And then I will be back the following week with a new episode, and that will be right at the end of the quarter. Hopefully Rice Fields will be done. And like I said, go to the Ravelry group, check that out so we can talk about the theme for the third quarter knit along. Until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful week and happy knitting.